So the third type of learning activity we want to look at is what we call peer assessment. So peer assessment is the possibility of engaging students in evaluating and giving feedback to their peers, so other students. So this is a, a very effective way to use the resources at your disposal to help you out as an instructor in your marking. And it's also a very rich way to deliver learning, because being critical and be able to assess our peers is somewhat very much tied to learning. So once again, we want to use DLE and a little bit of ePortfolio to create this type of activity. So the objectives are to bring a level of transparency to the assessment process. So it's not only about the instructor, it can also be about peers. Enable learning through assessing someone else's work, develop constructive criticisms in students, and alleviate the burden of the evaluation process. So once again, what we want to do here is create a sharing group. And so let's look at the steps here. We want to create a sharing group with a hashtag and add a course. Create a rubric, because we will be using a shared rubric for students to be able to assess their peers. Set up collections in ePortfolio, push the collections, and then collect grades and statistics. So first things first, as an instructor, so I'll just make sure I'm logged in as the instructor here. And as instructor, I want to create my sharing group. So I'll go to edit course and go to sharing groups. And once again, I have a pre-created sharing group here, peer review, peer assessment. And so name, and here it's a bit different. So it's a collection. So instead of being a reflection, we'll be using a collection, and there's obvious reasons for that, is that we will want students to be able to deposit their original works within their individual collections for then allowing peers to actually access their work. So we have a tag, and here it's a bit different. So in our sharing, it's a bit different. So we want to have all users within the course being able to access all collections. So what happens is, for example, in our course, John Aronson, that's one of the students, will be able to submit his work into his collection, but will also be able to assess the work of his peers. So the Frank Catchers and the Marsha Garcias of his course. So that's basically the setup for the sharing group. Now, what we want to do is also make sure that we have a rubric that's defined for our activity. So for example here, I'll just use a basic, let's say, creative thinking rubric. So if I view this rubric, or even I'll go with the first one, it'll be easier. So the civic engagement rubric. So I preview this. This is the rubric that students will use to assess the work of their peers. So I've got a rubric going. I could have created a brand new rubric, but here I already have some rubrics, so I'll keep it there. And then as a teacher, I'll go into ePortfolio, and I'll create a collection here. And I'll name it peer review items. And I'll add my tag. So my tag is OLSPR. Here it is. That's my tag. And I'll save this. And the next step here is I want to add a rubric. So not very important here. I'll use a creative thinking rubric. Add this one and save and close. So my collection is now created, and a little bit like I did for the journals, I'll push this collection to my courses, LS course, and it'll create 6 copies of those collections. Now, well, once again, what I can do is destroy this one, because this was just used by the professor to actually generate individual collections for each student. So now, if I log out of the instructor's role and I go into the course as a student, so John, and I go in EP here. So as you see, John has an item called peer review items. And what we would instruct John to do is to actually add to this collection his work. So I want to, for example, I want to submit a Word file that I have on my computer. So a blog, for example. So I'll add this to my portfolio. and I'll save this. And the important thing here is I got to be certain that this file is within my collection. So I'll add this file too. Oops, no, I'll go this way. I'll go this way. I'll add this file to my peer review collection. So now it's available for my peers to assess. So if I go back to ePortfolio, everything's here. And now what will happen is I'll go into portfolio as a different student. So let's say Frank. And as you can see, Frank has his collection. Now I'll stop here, let the sharing happen in the background, and come back with Frank being able to assess John's work.